Welcome to a special guest edition of the BumbleKast. I'm your host, Ian Flynn, the Bumble King, and joining me as always is my Bumble co-host, Kyle, JCRB Krause.
Hello. Let's not waste any time. Let's jump right on in and go ahead and introduce our guests. Who do we got?
Absolutely.
All
Please
right.
welcome David to the show.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is David. I have been reading and following Ian Flynn's work for about the past decade right now, and I've looking to try to come. I've been looking forward to coming on the show for a while to try to ask him a couple of questions and get more of an insight into how he works as a writer. I have been I've been known to be a bit critical of his work on Twitter for a little while, and I'm looking to try to see if I can get more insight into how he ultimately works. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm going for. So that's kind of what I want to try doing for today because at the end of the day, because speaking personally, I want Ian Flynn to be the best writer to have ever existed in the history of ever. And
It's all order.
no, seriously, for real. Like, especially as someone who is a fan of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, and since you are going to be writing on Sonic Frontiers, which, by the way, congratulations. I want you to try to be as great as you can on that game, and potentially on any other games that you write afterwards. So honestly, with this conversation, with all the questions that I do want to ask you, I either want to come out of this conversation really thinking, like genuinely believing that you are currently the best writer to have ever existed, or if possibly, to hopefully these questions and topics that we have in this conversation can help you to become that, can at least be at least a little bit of a step in order to get you into that position.
There's always room for improvement. Best ever, that's never going to happen. There's a long list of people well in front of me. But, there's always room for critique and improvement. So let's get on with it. Lead
All
on,
right.
sir. Play on.
Okay, so I want to start out with, generally speaking, right now, I have surprisingly I mainly want to try focusing a lot on your work on Reboot, Archie, as well as in IDW. But before we jump into that, I want to ask a couple of ground questions so I have at least an idea about like what ultimately is and what isn't you. So if you don't mind, I want to try starting out with something that I know you've been asked before, but I want to just get it here for this episode. So I know throughout since you've been writing for Sonic, Sega has always had like some amount of editorial control about what it ultimately ends up going into the book or not. So when it comes to reboot and as well as IDW, do you feel like most of what you were going for those stories was able to end up in print, or if not, what were major things that were not able to be done?
I would say that, I can kvetch all I want about the mandates. Ooh, the spooky mandates.
Mhm.
And, the conflicts of creativity here and there. But really and truly, getting down to it, I feel like I have had a great deal of creative freedom pre, post, and IDW. Most of the hangups are on small details, and in some cases, it's for the better. Like something we've discussed on the show in the past is with the Shadowfall arc post reboot. I
Mhm.
wanted to resurrect Mephiles and Black Doom as shadow antagonists because that's what he has in terms of game material.
Mhm.
And they came back with, no, they're dead. You can't use them, which is a legitimate reason. And what we got from that was, oh shoot, I forgot Eclipse. There we go. Blanked on it. We got Eclipse and that whole storyline, which honestly is a lot better than what the original pitch was. So there's stuff here and there. There's the ongoing oddities that ruffle my feathers, or there will be a policy change every so often. It's like, well, you said we could do this in the past and now we can't. Phooey. But overall, like the Metal Virus arc itself, I didn't honestly think we would get at all. Like I pitched that as this is what I want to do, but here's my let me have something in the back pocket just in case. And they were incredibly generous with like 99% of that. Maybe I kind of play it up a little too much just because I'm a man child. But now overall, I've been able to tell most of what I've wanted to tell.
Okay. All right. And so the reason why I was asking that is because, like, honestly, one of the things that when I've been active and interacting with your fans is that a lot of times they will throw like the Sega mandates or mandates whenever, or like say like it was always beyond your control with every criticism that comes up towards you. So I was kind of just looking to see like, but the reason I want to ask that is because like I really want to be able to say like when it comes to the stuff that comes here, this is your decision, not just Sega being micromanagement. So I'm like, I understand that they do have some control, but I do want to think like most of like a lot of what you're going for here is you. It's not just everything is just because Sega is micromanaging everything that comes out of your book. So no, that's
Well,
good to hear.
there's also a degree of common sense,
Hmm.
like I'm not going to try to pitch something that I know is going to brand or that I know in the past has not been able to fly. So I'm not going to seek out confrontation necessarily. Like one of the things that is been around since the inception of the franchise is Sonic and Amy. What is
Hmm.
their ultimate goal? Why don't they get their happily ever after? Why can't Sonic commit? Yada 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 yada. And the answer to that has changed over the years. The present course is that Sega doesn't want us to get into any in-depth romantic relationships, period. And it so there you go. I can't really explore Sonic or Amy in anything beyond that satisfying, sure, but it's also not completely pigeonholing because there should be more to them than just the romantic angle. So fine, we've got to stay in that lane when we work with those characters. Let's explore different aspects of their dynamics that isn't just the will they won't they.
Okay. All right, so with that out of the way, I wanted to shift over a little bit. So last year, when you and Stanley and a couple other people were doing the IDW panel, one of the things that you ended up saying was that you were giving Stanley as like for what it sounded like you were trying to give her 100% creative control about what the arcs that she was doing for the book, which while um while I had my own perception on, the thing that I found fascinating was by the end of that arc, she was doing things with Starline that were direct consequences from what you were doing at Bad Guys, which was coming out at the same time. So, like, what was was there like any type of conversation? Like, did she come to you for that idea, or did you go to her, or like, did you ask her to put that in the book?
Oh, in that case, it was collaboration. Um,
Okay.
like when I said that back, God, when was that panel? In the long, long ago.
It's like I think like I want to say like July of 2021. Oh, it was no July of 20. It was like July or August of 2020.
Really, it wasn't that far back. Okay, okay, time is fluid. I have no perception of it anymore. Mostly, I wanted to put it in the minds of the readership that Evan wasn't an understudy. I wasn't like still steering the ship. It's Evan's lead writer now, and I didn't want her to be saddled with any kind of conspiracy nonsense that she's just Ian's puppet or Ian's really running things behind the scenes. No, Evan is running the book, and good on her. She earned that position over the years. Any contribution I am adding to the book, I am trying to put it through, her and the editors so that we are all one cohesive vision, not that here's what I'm trying to do and backseat drive. You dig me? So
Yes.
when we were putting together the springboards for the year, it's like, okay, what do you want to do, Evan? And then anything that I want to contribute, how does that work within her framework? And what little moments can we add back and forth so that the whole thing feels more connected and like one big story instead of here's Evan's thing, here's Ian's thing, and have a great big divide, which has hurt Sonic books in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, I know in particular. I was actually reading through. Actually reading through issues 130 to 160 with another friend of mine that was on this channel. Who's actually on here asking a question a while ago, Ian Waffles, and we were reading through the stuff with bowlers and penders, and it was fascinating to see how much their scripts would like have little to do with each other or blatantly contradict one another. So no, that totally makes sense. You guys would be would at least be communicating with making sure that the story stays on track. So no, I totally get that. Next up, so when it comes to the beginning of IDW in particular, were you when it comes to the general premise, and it seemed to be like it was trying to lessen unofficial continuing of forces without directly referencing anything from it. So was that initial premise something that came from Sega, or was that something that you wanted to try to do?
That was my thinking, because my thinking was the timing was perfect. We had the new Sonic book, we just had the new game. Most people who are going to be coming to the book are going to have that as their familiar basis of Sonic, because Archie Sonic was off limits entirely. There would, of course,
Mhm.
be some folks coming over because you need your monthly Sonic fix, but we're reaching out to an audience that isn't just the old Archie Sonic fans. We were trying to get as many new readers as possible. So, new Sonic game, that's going to be the freshest material in mind. I figured that was a good starting point. Except Sega didn't really want us referencing it too directly, so we had to do it in passing, which teehee, whoopsies. Um, there was also the aspect where Joe Hughes wanted to do a issue a week for the launch. So those 4 issues had to be treated as something of a mini series. Each one had to be treated as kind of a standalone introductory story, because if it's coming up that rapidly, somebody might miss an issue before or after. But it was all also building towards what we wanted to do for year one entirely. So, a new Sonic book that appeals to the general Sonic populace and possibly outside of that, because folks will be going, oh, it's a new book. Let me give that a shot. That does take advantage of new game synergy, but also doesn't fully address it. Also has to meet the 4 issues a week design with kind of a mini series. All that work at once, and it's like, I think we got it to work. I think it's okay.
Okay. All right. So I think that's a good general basis for a lot of the questions I'm going to try going off of. So I do want to get to IDW, but let's rewind to reboot for a little bit. So I know you have Lost Hedgehog. You are looking to try to do Lost Hedgehog tales in the near future. So I'm trying to avoid asking any questions about stuff that's going to happen in the future. But I do have a couple of questions when it comes to some of the things when it came to the main cast in particular. So the first thing is when you were doing the book and you came out right, and it came right after you did the after the first reboot, after the reboot. You the characters were redesigned and you were trying to take them, and it seemed like you were trying to take them at least a somewhat different direction, and you were trying to have a new Freedom Fighters cast, which was combining the original Freedom Fighters team that was all the way back from SatM and some of the second characters, which I get. But the thing that kind of confused me was why would you try to have a cast of 11? Because that seems real. Because like I can't really think of any series that I would think could be able to handle a cast that big without causing some problems without being able to while also being able to handle all of them accordingly. So like, was there any reason why you decided to go for a cast of 11?
It is a large number for an ensemble book, but part of that comes baked in because the Freedom Fighters alone, Sally, Antoine, Bunny, Rotor, Nicole, that's 5 straight up.
Mm-hmm.
Sonic and Tails are a must because they're the principal characters, and you can't really leave Amy out anymore. She's kind of now part of the regular trio because Knuckles is kind of relegated to the island more nowadays. So that's 8. And let's see who else was on there. There was Cream and Big. Who was 11?
Oh, Chip.
Chip was a guest character. That's not going to count.
Well,
Um,
okay, I'm gonna get to that because Chip is actually the follow up I want to get to later. But yeah, let's just stick to 10. So, like, really in particular, like, why? So, really, the question is more about like when it comes to the main Freedom Fighter, when it comes to the Saturn 5, Sonic Tails, Amy, totally get that. Like that 8, I'm just like, yeah, no, you have to have those. But why Big and Cream in particular?
Well, because it would, number one, I like them. Two, because Cream's fan base is extremely vocal. And also because out of those 10, not everyone is a principal character in this ensemble. Sonic is obviously the star of the book. Sally is easily the lead female role, with Amy, I don't want to say competing because that's going to send the wrong message to some folks.
Yeah.
Uh, Co-female star, let's say. The Freedom Fighters there for the old school fans who stuck with the book even after the reboot. Thank you very much. And then the Sega cast for those who are here for Sonic, because that is what the book is about. And then everybody else is kind of in diminishing tiers of importance. Like Antoine, Rotor, Bunny, Nicole, they're all supporting characters to your principal trio. Tails, debatably. Amy, they're kind of supporting to Sonic. Big is there for a moment of levity or for a sight gag. Cream is supporting to Amy. So while you have a cast of 10, you only have like 3 principals, and then everybody else is there to back up. And when you need a break from that principal cast, you have that extended cast to fall back on. So we've had a big moment with Sally, let's say. Now we can shift focus to Bunny or Antoine or Rotor and tell a story that focuses on them, and everyone else is kind of shifted around to be support cast to that. Or maybe not, because with the virtue of the Sky Patrol, they can go anywhere in the world, and the cast can, pick an away team of however many to do whatever story we need to do, whether it's a big one or a smaller, more personal one, so that you have not so much an active cast of 10, but more like a toolbox where you have an accessible number of characters that you can use for whatever story you need.
Okay. All right. So that's fair enough. So when it comes to, I guess the character I tried to more or less I tried to imply was the 11th. I want to talk about Chip a little bit. So I get when it comes to the when it comes to the first arc and reboot, the first saga really was meant to be more or less kind of a retelling of the story from Sonic Unleashed. And while I do get the idea about, from my understanding, it seemed like you were trying to have Chip get introduced in the universe arc, so it didn't come off as convenient. That there was actually a reason as to why they were coming across him, rather than being kind of the convenience it was in the game. If I may ask, why did Chip only really meet up with Sonic to like about meet up and properly meet up with Sonic until like about halfway through the arc, halfway through the saga?
Um, and forgive me, it's been a long time since I had to
Yeah, no
think about
problem.
this, but the whole Shadow World arc was honestly a bit of a scramble to put
Hmm.
together, and the thinking at the time was, okay, it's a new continuity, so we need to make it appealing and accessible to your casual Sonic fan. It needs to be recognizable as a Sonic book. And
Hmm.
pre-reboot was very wild and wacky and did a lot of interesting things, but
Yeah.
sometimes it was unrecognizable as a Sonic product. So we were trying to steer a little closer to brand, which would be more accessible to a larger audience, plus it would make approvals a little easier, we thought. At the same time, you can't just ignore 200 plus something issues of story and love and creativity. The fans would, it's too much of a whiplash for the fandom. So that's why we brought back the Freedom Fighters and what elements we could from Adventures of and Sad AM, so that they would at least feel a little comfortable.
Right.
It's the characters that they're a little different, but we haven't just thrown you out with the bathwater. We're trying to meet you halfway. And then it was a question of, okay, what do we do to frame all this? Because we've got to reintroduce the SAT 5. We've got to introduce the new world. We've got to introduce the new status quo. We've got to establish, what the new, more game-centric flavor of the book is. How do we do all of that in a way that isn't just a lore dump? And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Unleashed still fairly fresh when that was coming out?
It was about. 5. It was like 5 to 7 years old when that issue dropped, I believe.
Really? Jeez. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, you can tell how well I can keep track of time.
Yeah, Unleashed was in 2008. So
wow, it's been that long.
That was it was like 4 or 5 years old by the time that happened.
All right.
So yeah, I know.
Then obviously that wasn't my mentality at the time, but you had Unleashed was the one game where the entire world was very clearly in danger. Aside from Shadow the Hedgehog, where that was a mess anyway. So Unleashed gave you this great opportunity to explore the world. We had, globe trotting locations pre-established. We had defined regions that we could build freedom fighter teams into. And that gave us a great framework that's familiar to the game crew, but also is rife with opportunities to explore. So we can do that with the SAT-AM crew and do it with the comic original stuff. And that's why we framed it in the Unleashed setting. Now, to get things going, we need to introduce the cast to the readers again. And we wanted to take our time with it because this was going to be a big change for the hardcore fans. And some of the updated versions were more extreme than others. So we wanted to take our time. We wanted to make sure that folks got comfortable with this new setup. And it was also kind of a countdown to the world exploding because that ticking clock is a very easy sellable angle.
Yeah.
So that right there is 5 issues of introductions. That's like almost half a year.
Mm-hmm.
And arguably we could have sped up the pace a bit, but we were also working under this mentality of we had time because at that point the Sonic book looked like it was never going to end. I mean, it was supposed to have died off back at number 50, and here we are in the 250s. So we thought we had time to do something nice and decompressed and really get into each little nook and cranny, slowly build and explore and whatnot. That's part of the reason why Chip was MIA for so long, is just the way that we built the story up to that point really wasn't conducive to him showing up. Could we have done that another way? Yeah, absolutely. I do think back on it every now and again and go, was that the right way to do it? Should we have done it faster or harder or whatever? But I don't know. At the time, it made sense.
Okay. All right. So I kind of want to, I'll bring this back up later. So the reason I was kind of asking about the chip thing is because by the end of the arc, you're having the whole thing about the series, especially by the end of this arc, you end up kind of doing the same thing that happened in Unleashed, where Chip is fusing back with Dark Gaia, going back on the planet and saying his goodbyes to everyone. And one of the things you try having him do is having this whole to have this whole sweet goodbye thing, trying to say goodbye to each of the freedom fighters. And while I get where you're trying to go for with that, it really didn't seem like it really seemed like it was going through the goodbyes for the sake of going through the goodbyes without him actually having the relationships. Because outside of like one page in the middle, one page I believe on like 279, 280, he never really had much of an interaction with any of the freedom fighters besides kind of Sonic and Tails. So it was just kind of weird for him to like have all this like, oh, I like thank you for having all these goodbyes with the freedom fighters when he didn't really spend any time with them. So I'm like, while I get that it seemed like you had a lot of time, like you felt like you had a lot of time, I was just kind of curious about like if was this like the initial plan for this goodbye, and if so, how come we didn't spend any time actually showing him showing him like having like personal one-on-one time with the freedom fighters?
Well, part of that was we were exploring other things, and honestly the time that we had spent on the Shattered World arc had gone on a little too long. We were a little too decompressed, and we needed to wrap it up, and we had to follow the same story beats with the game. So yeah, that last moment of that page of him having these personal interactions was an attempt to kind of say there were some off-screen moments that they had together, but it was not ideal, obviously. Looking back, it would have been better to have a little more time with Chip doing stuff with the other characters, because I remember we had a little bit of trouble with approval, but I think that was more with the Gaia temples themselves. I think Chip was fairly okay in usage.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, if you don't have perfect memory about this.
I recall, it was yeah, I think Chip was fairly easy to use. So it was it was a bandage on a bullet wound, basically. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, we want to have this moment, but we didn't get the chance to do it because we were doing everything else. Let's at least to try to imply that there was a little bit more there and then wrap it up. Perfect execution by no means,
Okay.
but it was also kind of, we also were thinking it's better than nothing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. No, that's true. Okay. All right. So okay, so let's talk about the other side of the Unleashed arc. So when you were trying, so one of the things you were trying to do with the Werehog in particular, it seemed like you were trying to have it be more of a conflict for Sonic than it was in the games. And while I respect the idea of trying to have it be more of a challenge for Sonic as a character, I've read through that arc several times trying to get an idea, and I have and I really wasn't able to tell what about that were you trying to challenge about Sonic, because it seemed like there were like four different things and none of them really made sense. So I was kind of curious, like, what were you trying to go for as a conflict for the Werehog? Like, what was supposed to be the challenge for Sonic when it comes to dealing with the Werehog?
Well, it's from what I remember, it was more that to have the Werehog actually be a transformation with consequences, that Sonic gains a wilder demeanor, a more vicious persona that he has to control. And he's not really about control. He's all about letting loose and live in the moment. It's supposed to be that, or at least the thinking at the time, was that it would be something that he had to control, which goes against his very nature, but he has to do it for the safety of his friends and everyone around him. Somebody made a point later on, though, that the point in Unleashed is that Sonic's soul, his essence, his personality is uncorruptible. Yes, he
Mm-hmm.
was infused with dark Gaia energy and it turned him into this beast, but he still retained his humanity, the essence that is him. And I get that. And that's really charming. And that would have been an interesting thing to explore. But at the time, I felt like here you have this complete transformation for Sonic. And a lot of the game animation showed him being more bestial overall. And nothing was done with it. It was just,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's Sonic. He's this big shaggy monster thing. And he's acting all wild in the gameplay, but he's just normal Sonic. And I felt like that was a wasted opportunity. So I wanted to explore that on my end. But at the same time, we couldn't have Sonic acting too out of character because Sega wouldn't allow that. So that's why we had the moment with Mighty. We have the moment of Sonic having lost control, and then via Mighty gets a hand on the reins, and from there is a little closer to how he was in Unleashed.
Okay. This one's about. I need to follow this one up. So I kind of have. I want to go ahead and try to focus on this a little bit because I kind of have problems with this on two fronts, and I want to try seeing what was going on here. Because on the first side, well, I get the idea that the whole idea is that he needs to learn how to control himself. I don't really get of why the scene really with the scene with Thunderbolt and Mighty was meant to show that, other than we don't want to hurt the villains, other than for we don't want to hurt the villains and prioritizing their well-being over, and it seems to be more about, like, it was about prioritizing their well-being over just Sonic being out of control, because I've seen these kind of stories before, but it was just kind of weird. It's like the moment that was supposed to be showing that he had gone too far was about him at the very least holding someone in the club, someone who just tried electrocuting him and his friends, and trying to make it seem like that was going too far. So I was like, why? So I get the idea of trying to show that he was starting to go too far, going out of control. But why with that in particular? Why have the scene be about how he's going too far with dealing with someone who is who's not only an outright villain in the story, but also someone who was basically just trying to kill them 2 minutes earlier? Especially because it ends with them basically saying, "Let them go. We can fight them again another day."
I'd have to look at the issue again specifically, but I think the core of that boils down to the whole heroes don't kill mantra. Sure, Thunderbolt can be
Okay.
villainous and murderous and whatnot, but that's because she's a villain, and that is bad. You don't want to go to deeper moral question to be had there in all media, but I'd have to look at the issue again. But I think that was the basic of it: is that you stop the villain, but you don't go too far. You don't take that extra step.
All right, no, that's fine. Actually, that's good for now. Actually, I want to try following that back up when we get to IDW because that's good. Because I have something to ask about that too, and that's going to be building on top of that. But the other side of it is, if the whole idea was that it was supposed to be about him understanding what it means to be able to control it, why why did it seem like it was just him jumping off the waterfall was the way to solve that issue? Because it kind of just seemed like after he's told like he needs to learn to accept it, he needs to learn not to control it but to accept it. We cut away from him and then we cut back. It's him falling off a waterfall, and then after that he's pretty much fine with how he was before. Like, what? How was that supposed to be the solution to that problem?
I'd have to read the issue again to see what we were trying to go for there. It might have been trying to remember, like, because he was training with Moss, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the implication was that there had been some time spent training, right?
Yes. There wasn't like a clear. It didn't really seem like that many days had passed. It really just seemed like it was just like. It really just seemed like it was just not too far after we cut away from them, and I wasn't really after reading that several times. I really didn't get like anything else other happen other than just like he just came off a waterfall.
Okay.
If you don't remember, that's fine. We can just move on to something else because we can move on to the next question if you don't remember.
I mean, I want to say it was something akin to, instead of resisting and just containing the bestial urges, because Sonic is not about containment, it's about accepting them and making them part of himself. So that, sure, he's got this wild, unbridled power, but instead of trying to restrain it and deny it, it's make it your own and channel it in the Sonic way, I think. At least that's how I try to spin it now.
Okay. You know what? That's fine. I'll come back to that later. Oh, if we have time, I'll try to come back to that. So I want to move on to something else real quick. So when it comes to okay, so I know Aaliyah Baker wrote this, and this was, but you were at least a part of the scenario developer when it comes to Spark of Life. So I know that you've said a couple of times that you were surprised that you were able to get away with so much, especially when it comes to how Sally and Nicole were portrayed and how you guys were more or less trying to go with the idea that they were slowly starting to become a couple. I've read that issue a couple of times, and if you do remember, if you don't, that's fine. But if you do remember, what about that four-parter was supposed to imply that they were romantically involved, like at all, or even romantically interested in one another?
Well, because it was written with the mindset of, if this were a typical male-female pairing, wouldn't you read a lot of pairing context into it? The hero and the heroine type of thing. Only it was the two female characters. Write them as you would any other pairing and see how it flies. And the tweet itself was poorly worded. I'll just go ahead and say that, because it was definitely done subtly, and it was the absolute base level of the relationship. This is where things would grow from there. But the intention, I feel like, if you know is there, you can read into it. And there were lots of opinions that spun out of that. Some folks thought it was not there at all. Some folks thought it was too subtle to pick up on, and others were like, "Oh, yeah, I see it. How did I miss it?" And that's just the virtue of putting things out into the world and seeing how it takes.
Okay. All right. So okay. So that's pretty much most of my conversations, or most of the questions I had for reboot. Um, Actually, I do have one more, but I was wondering. could I, just to make sure I don't cross any toes about Lost Hedgehog Tales, am I allowed to ask anything about Rotor and Tundra?
Um, nah. Let's save that for
All right,
later.
no, that's fine. Okay, so all right, let's just go ahead and move over to IDW this for now. So overall, it seemed like you were when it comes to how you were doing the ensemble, when it comes to how you're handling the cast overall, it seemed like you were trying to go in the opposite direction in the sense where it seemed like with Archie, you were trying to have a more while you have described it as more like primary and then like support characters within the main cast, it did seem like you were trying to have a main cast. However, for the IDW stuff, it seemed like you were just trying to have like all the characters without really having any and outside of Sonic, it didn't really seem like you were trying to outside of like Sonic and the newer characters, it didn't really seem like you were trying to have like a clear focus when it comes to any of the characters. So, was there any particular reason why you didn't want to go with the main cast for this book?
With IDW, I was trying to build something completely different. Like
Mm-hmm.
Archie Sonic was very typical of your DC Marvel superhero book. You had your ensemble team, they were based out of their city, be it Knothole or Mobotropolis or New Mobotropolis, and the threats came from the outside, or they all got into their super awesome jet plane and flew off to have adventures, but they always came home. And that isn't really Sonic. Sonic is about going to new locations and exploring and adventuring, and that's what the Sky Patrol was supposed to help alleviate, is that they still had the home base. You still had a reason for all these characters to be together at once, but it itself was mobile. With IDW Sonic, I approached it as more of a shonen manga. There is no central base to protect. There is no core team of superpowered commando friends to always fall back on. It was Sonic is the vagabond who travels to location, having adventures, solving problems, and meeting old or new friends. Something that's way more in line with what the games have been doing as of late. And then when you have a big crisis like Neo Metal taking over Angel Island and everybody comes together, then that's a big important moment. Everybody's here. Holy crap, you know that this is important because it's not just Sonic this time, it's everybody.
Okay. Actually, I found something a little curious about that. So you said, oh, like you were trying to make this a little bit more like a how shonen manga tends to function when it comes to its group ensembles. Just out of curiosity, what shonen manga were you thinking about in particular?
Nothing in specific mentality. A little bit of I'm going off of what I have read and seen. You know, a little bit of
Hmm.
Dragon Ball Z, a little bit of My Hero Academia, a little bit of Gurren Lagann, a little bit of Full Metal Alchemist. The idea being that there's an overarching plot, obviously, but that adventures are largely self-contained and bite-sized.
Hmm.
So, you know, in the first four issues, it's Sonic and Tails, it's Sonic and Amy, it's Sonic and Knuckles, it's Sonic and Blaze, and also Tangle. And somebody's bringing the badniks together. What is the mystery here? But each individual story is self-contained, liberating the one city, or Amy in her as a force's more commanding role, introducing Rough and Tumble to have a little more of a wider roster of villain, that kind of thing. And Tangle being the newbie, is the reader's window into such complex concepts as interdimensional fire princesses. So each one was meant to be kind of a beat, and then we get to the big season finale, which was the assault on the captured Angel Island.
Okay. All right. So let's pick over to Amy real quick. Let's since you brought her up, let me talk about Amy real quick. Um, So one of the things I actually have always, one of the things I've always thought about when it comes to how you wrote Archie is that even with a lot of the other problems I had with it, one of the things I stand by and think that you did exceptionally well was how you wrote Amy. However, when it comes to this book, there have been a couple of things that have been raising my eyebrow in particular. And one of the things I was wondering about is with the Game Informer interview that you did, especially when it comes to what you were saying about with some of the female characters. So when it came to Amy in particular, you said that she was kind of that it was kind of weird for her to be like one of the main female characters because she was too all over the place. What did you really mean? What did you mean by that?
Because let's look at her characterization from adventures through to present day. Because in
Mm-hmm.
adventure, she's an upbeat, plucky individual who learns to rely on herself, to find her own inner strength by the end of it. And that's great. That
Mm-hmm.
is a fantastic arc for her. And in Adventure 2, she's storming Prison Island by herself without Tails' help. Thank you very much. And she's a bit flirty with Sonic, and she's kind of gets left on the wayside, but she's still this thoughtful and heart-driven character. She's the one who gets Shadow to realize his mistakes and come around. Right there. Great evolution of the character. She could stand to be a little more active with the boys, but still, she has grown and shown that independence. Lovely. Then we get to Heroes, and she is like obsessed with Sonic. She's going to beat Sonic up in a boss fight, and he has to marry her. Cheese is worried about Chocolate. Big is missing his best friend, and she's still pining for Sonic. Oh yeah, she'll help her friends too. It's a little weird. And then we get into battle where she's like training herself to the point of delusion so that she can be closer to Sonic. And it's like, girl, not so great. Chronicles, which isn't canon, but still was, you know, part of that era. She's making up people to make Sonic jealous.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Sonic X, where she's this kind of hair trigger temper. Oh, she's cutesy and coy at this point, and now she's screamingly violent, and now she's flipping back again, where it can be funny, but it's also kind of like borderline bipolar.
Yeah.
And then you get to like Generations where Sonic is holding her away at arm's length, like face palming her, but then they're closer buddies, and now she's kind of like one of the lead organizers within the resistance and forces. She's the one who's managing the files, she's manning the computer, she's organizing everybody in there. Knuckles may be commander, but she seems to be the one who's kind of keeping things in order. And it's like, which one is Amy? I mean, you can find a through line through there if you try, but she's been up and down all over the place. She has been emotionally extreme. She's been very sedate. She has been all over Sonic to unhealthy degrees. She's been a polite friend that respects boundaries. Where is the Amy?
Okay, so that I actually do all get if you're trying to take it as like every story is supposed to be like a continuation and you're just looking at what the material is without taking into consideration anything else. That I do get. So, but I guess the question I would ask is if you are clearly aware of the problems that she's had to this point, and I'm agreeing with you, those are problems. Why not just take the characterization that you have with her and Archie, or even better, take something that, even better, just take her in a direction where it actually would be take like either the best parts or like a more fitting characterization that would work for the book, rather than I guess try to find a way to balance all of those, trying a way to balance all of those, if that makes sense.
Well, because with IDW Sonic, it was the new start. So all that came before is now moot. And
Hmm.
Forces was the starting point to work from. And that was Amy. That's the character that we have to work with at the time. And that's not necessarily what Sega wants her character to be after Forces. So as they are figuring out who she is going forward, we're kind of trying to play catch up. Um, I think Evan found a nice balance of the caring and compassionate, but also able to get things done, Amy. That kind of
Hmm.
SA1, SA2 with a little bit of Forces mixed in with that last arc she did with the forest fire. So I think that's a good place for her now, and that would be where we would probably grow from there.
Okay. Um, let's move on to Rouge for a little bit because this is something I found a little interesting. So, in that Game Informer interview, you also end up saying like Rouge has um Rouge has an odd sex appeal for a cartoon bat, and while I do get that position to a certain extent, I why would that, I'm not saying that that would mean that she would need to be like necessarily the main female in the book, but why did it seem like that was coming off as especially considering how little that she has kind of shown up in IDW up to this point? How come that seemed like it was that kind of way to say like you didn't want to like why was that the reason that why did that come up as a reason as to why like she should more or less be downplayed for involvement in the story?
I didn't mean to imply that she should be downplayed. It's just that it's what kind of female roles, because the Game Informer interview has been a long time. Was that when we were discussing the introduction of Tangle and Whisper, like what role they
Yes.
served?
Yes.
Okay. And just trying to dictate what kind of niches had been filled up to this point. Amy was, as we covered, kind of all over the place. She didn't really fill a role. And then Rouge is kind of an odd one out as well, because if you look at the entire line of characters, who else is remotely sexualized like Rouge?
Mm.
And not that there's anything wrong with overt sexualization as long as it's handled respectfully, but that right there colors the character and her implementation. And even Sega has less than clear directives on how to utilize that aspect of her. And even beyond that, I've received conflicting notes about what her morality is, where in the games we've seen she does things to
Mm.
save the world, and the notes that come back are no, she's a dark character, she's totally self-serving. If she's saving the world, it's for her own benefit. And it's like, okay, I can see that, but it isn't quite what's been presented. So she's kind of like Amy, where you have to figure out what they want and how to best utilize it. But either way, they aren't characters who are, or Rouge is more of the spy and tactician. She's not going to mix it up unless she's got a game plan in mind.
Mhm.
Amy is reaching the point where we can just say, okay, she's an adventurer like everybody else. She's freely accessible. And Cream, unfortunately, has been relegated to child sidekick, despite what she can do in the advanced series. So it's like, who do we have that's just a get up and go and do character like Sonic? Who can just go on an adventure with him like Tails? And that's where Tangle was introduced. Just somebody who is get out there and go and bust up a badnik. Woo-ha. And then with all these extremely extreme characters, Whisper is meant to be kind of the antithesis of that. She is the reserved one. She is not going to be a big bombastic personality like so many others. She's there to act as kind of the foil to all of them by being so withdrawn and quiet and reserved. But with the Wispon, excuse me, with the variable Wispon, she has the ability to keep pace with all these other characters.
Okay. Well, let's shift over into the new girls because that's something that's been also been kind of bothering me. So, in a series like this, I told not only do I get it, I actually encourage the idea of adding in more characters. You absolutely should in a franchise in an adventure series. You absolutely should be adding in as many characters that especially that benefit and move the story forward. But I also think when you're adding in characters, they should be doing something that actually adds to the chemistry a little bit. And you seem to be describing them like that as describing them like, yeah, this is what Tangle can do and this is what Whisper can do. But the thing that I'm finding kind of curious is that even though I get the idea that that's what you're going for, how come it seems like these two don't really have any interactions with anyone else other than each other? Like, I can like they don't really seem to have like they really only seem to be connecting and interacting with one another, not really in terms of connecting or having a relationship with like a friendship or any type of back and forth with anyone else. Like they kind of did with Silver and Blaze, But considering the fact that they pretty much end up disappearing by the end of their own, by the end of the Metal Virus arc, I mean, by the end of the Metal Sonic arc, and especially by the end of the Metal Virus arc, it doesn't really seem like they were connecting with anyone else in the main cast. So I'm like, why does it seem like they're only releasing to be connecting with each other, not with the rest of the characters?
Uh, I don't know about that. Part of it is marketability. The Tangle and Whisper miniseries came out of nowhere. I was not ready for that one.
Mhm.
And the popularity of the two of them playing off each other has kind of driven where they've gone from there. We could stand to do more with them interacting with other characters, but I mean, Tangle was with Amy and her crew when they went into the forest. She was there to interact with Belle and help with that one Eggman base story. You had Cream stopping Whisper from pulling the trigger on Eggman, and you have the very understated but still present issue of Whisper having issue with Shadow just by virtue of his association with what happened to the Diamond Cutters. So there's more to explore, sure, but the book also isn't remotely done yet. There's other things we can do.
Right, but going off of the things that we just described, but going off of like those certain scenes that they've had before, it kind of ends up leaving a bit of a question. I still think it's a bit of a fair question. Like, yeah, Amy. Like, I'm really trying to not go in too much into like Baker stuff right now. I mean, not Baker, into Stanley stuff because like I'm trying to keep this more on the writing that you've done. But when it comes to the Forest Fire arc, for the most part, Amy really was more or less interacting to really try to just have Jewel continue to go through an arc about trying to just step up to be a leader, and go off of that. But then when we have Tangle, yes, she's starting to go back and forth with Belle, but that's still kind of the same thing of she's still interacting with one of the new, still trying to interact with the new girls, with the new characters, not really trying to integrate them properly with the rest of the cast. Because Belle definitely has that problem. But when it comes to but that's kind of what I was trying to go for. But you're right, the book's not over yet. But that's something that I was just kind of noticing. It's just like, yeah, Tangle was introduced and was meant to be like another action female character that could go alongside with other adventures, but hasn't really gotten a chance to. But after like issue 25, they haven't really had any type of back and forth or really type of focus on how they work off of each other than just like at the end of the Forest Fire arc. But I will go ahead and just put that as a mark for maybe that can go into more later.
I mean, you're not
So
wrong. There is a lot of Tangle and Whisper together focus, and there could
mhm.
stand to be more Tangle with other characters. But no, no, you're right. We're both right. Everybody's right. We all win.
Okay. Okay. So let's jump over to Sonic real quick. So when it comes to the whole thing about the whole Tinker subplot, when it comes to everything about um everything when it came to the whole Tinker subplot, the whole ethical dilemma that you were doing for the Zombot arc, it seemed like you were trying to. I know that you were trying to put this up like you were trying to have like an open ethical dilemma that the audience was supposed to go for. And while I kind of get that, I kind of have two things about the multiple things, but I'm gonna try to keep it at least to the main two. I get the idea of I get the idea of trying to have more of an ethical limit, try to like really bring up the idea of conflict and try to have a little bit more of a try to have at least trying to explore ethical dilemmas in your story. I do think that can be fascinating. But my problem here is when it comes to the idea of Sonic deciding to say, "Hey, let's go." Like, Tinker doesn't have his memories anymore. Let's just go ahead and let him live out the rest of his life, and then having that backfire so massively that leads to what's essentially Eggman's third apocalypse in this book, third apocalypse by proxy. Why have his mercy have why not only have his mercy have such negative consequences, but why after all of that still have him double down on his decision, double down and basically say like that was the right decision to make.
Well, number one, it was something of an attempt on my end to rationalize why does Sonic do this, particularly satisfied with Sega's explanation. So why is it that the cast and crew allow Eggman to be? And then in Tinker sense, I mean, ultimately, when you get down to it, Sonic was right. Mr. Tinker never returned to villainy. He never sought out being a bad guy again. It was Dr. Starline. Dr. Starline chose to hunt down Eggman, chose to resurrect that evil. And if it weren't for Starline, we wouldn't have a fully active Metal Sonic. We wouldn't have a Metal Virus skin. This is all at Starline's feet. And ultimately, what I'm trying to say there is it is very difficult to take the high road because you never know when someone is going to be a scumbag and subvert all the good that you've done. That doesn't invalidate the good that you do. You have to stay true to that moral compass, but you also have to be prepared to deal with the consequences of giving people another chance. Sometimes it leads to the better, and sometimes you're going to be taken advantage of. And that's the hard part of being in the right.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. Okay, so here's my problem. So when it comes to the idea of what it seems to be kind of going for, you're trying to say like you need to stay true to your virtues, stay true to your code, stay true to what your what his principles are. And I respect that to a degree. But my problem is that when you end up having such massive consequences to that, to the point that it is basically causing this much death and suffering, it's not that I want Sonic to kill Eggman. Like I know it's never gonna happen, but also I don't really want or need Sonic to have. I don't need him to turn. I don't need him to be a new Shadow. But why put him in a situation? Because especially since you seem to be going a lot of his books, he's be going out of his way to say like prison imprisonment isn't an option for one reason or another. Why put him in a situation where the two options are either killing them or letting them go? So what killing them, letting them go? Why put him in that situation in the first place?
Well, that's kind of the situation of where we are in the franchise. You have to let them
Mm-hmm.
go because there has to be future adventures. But all the stuff that Eggman has done really isn't forgivable when you get down to it. So, what is your solution? Like, I don't remember anyone saying that you can't contain Eggman, but I mean, in the case of Tinker, he wasn't Eggman anymore. He was a different persona. He was a wholesome, healthy individual in a remote town, so he's not a danger to anyone immediately.
Okay. So, okay, so this is so kind of what you were saying before is like ultimately like how Sega was like how you're trying to say like Sega ultimately just didn't want to kill him off and doesn't want them to really deal with them. And you're right. Most like pretty much everything that Eggman has done to this point is unforgivable. But why? I guess. But to be fair, I'm like that could be applied to, and they are still trying. Let me. Sorry. I get where your problems come from. Where it's like, yeah, there should be a reason why they don't have him put him down. They don't never either kill him or like put him away permanently because both just like in universe is not really in character for Sonic and Code to say put him in jail and out of universe. It is ultimately he's ultimately a mainstay main villain of the franchise, which I get. But why? I guess the question I ultimately have is like of instead of just going like the more Saturday morning cartoon villain route, where it's like they beat him, but he's able to get away for one reason or another, or he's able to have enough of a distance between what he ends up doing and where the characters are ultimately are, where they can't just punt, where they can't just beat him up. Why choose this route to justify where he basically goes, where Sonic basically goes, I hope he can become good one day because he did it because he was good when he was 10. He was good essentially when he had brain damage.
Well, number one, if like let's say that the Tinker story was played out differently and they found
Mhm.
Eggman in his normal mindset laid up in a bed in the village, they would absolutely cart him off to a jail cell. They wouldn't say, oh, well, he's just stuck in bed for now, he's fine. They would take action there. The distinction
Mhm.
was that Tinker was a different persona. And the other aspect of it is he has been vital to the protection of the world in the past. He was there to stand against Black Arms, and when he applies himself, he can do good. Granted, all the nonsense that happened on the Ark is kind of his. fault, but when the chips were down, he was there to assist and figure out a way to stop ultimately the destruction of the world. And we can go back and forth on what virtues he has and how they're invalidated by the vices that he has. But ultimately, it's Sonic's decision to give Eggman the freedom of choice to be a better person rather than take that away from him. I can't think of an immediate example where he was in the position to bring Eggman down. Like, shoot, how did Metal Virus end? Everybody was recovering from just the shock of being restored, and Eggman escaped while they weren't paying attention. So, like, as it stands right now, Sonic isn't going to pull his punches. If Eggman is doing bad, he's gonna stop him. There's no debate about that. But he's not going to ever pull the trigger and ensure that Eggman never has the chance to get his act together. That's the distinction.
Okay. So this is where I kind of want to bring back up the stuff with the no kill rule from like with Thunderbolt, because again I'm standing by that. I don't want Sonic to be killing anybody, and I don't want or need Sonic to kill anybody. But it seems like a lot of times, the character, when it comes to the villains, you seem to have like a really consistent thing about having uh, their not sense of worth. Basically, when it comes to their well-being, has to also be considered or taken care of in mind. Because while yes, we talked about Eggman a lot, this isn't the first time you did that. Like I think you did it well in Archie when it came to when Eggman lost his mind and like in the early 200s. But then when it comes to then you had Thunderbolt in the later issues. Then we also had everything with metal, everything with, like when it came to metal at the end of the Metal Virus arc, when it comes to the Zeti, where the whole idea is that kicking them off world is a better way to try to deal with them, and he's going to stick, and that was that whole I'm going to stick by my principles rather than stick by my principles. I guess my question here is like, again, I guess my big problem here is like, I get the idea of Sonic wanting everyone to have the freedom of choice, but especially when it comes to Metal Sonic in particular, why have the freedom of choice for someone who's actively shown that they are a problem they are a problem and can cause suffering for others, and still say, yeah, we'll let you go. There's no way that you could ever be a problem again, even though we just established that they do want to cause problems, and they are actively capable of putting themselves back together. Like Metal, maybe not. Maybe if he didn't go after Eggman in particular, I don't think it would really have been out of the question just in universe that he would either find a way to cause more problems or find a way to rebuild himself in some way, shape, or form, because there were still other egg bases around. So like, why keep having that? Why keep having that theme come up?
Well, let's talk about Metal Sonic specifically. He wouldn't be able to be a weaponized threat anymore.
Mhm.
Like the worst he could do is like swipe at you, maybe glare from the shadows, be an uncomfortable presence while you have your breakfast. But the thinking there was that Tails had de-weaponized him. He was not going to be a threat to anyone else, and that was why they were letting him go. He could go to any egg base you want, but he's not any kind of repair bot. He's not someone who is programmed to be reconstructed. He is kind of just built to take out Sonic. Beyond that, he has no capabilities. But that we're getting into the weeds. The general theming there is that I personally feel like there are bad people in the world and they need to be dealt with directly, but you cannot stoop to their level. It doesn't matter what atrocities they have committed for whatever reason, you still have to take the high road because that sets the bar. That's what defines them as the bad people, that they are the problem. And the minute you start going for eye for an eye, you're lowering that bar, and then there is no distinction. It's everybody just out for themselves, and it becomes a free-for-all. And it's not the easiest moral fiber to maintain. Heaven knows I am not necessarily beholden to it myself sometimes, and it's something that I'm trying to be mindful of. But it's this idea that just because people are awful doesn't mean that you should be just as awful, or that you can be, or that you should be that awful in return. So, yes, the villains are villainous, they go way too far, and they must be stopped, but they must still be treated with respect and with common decency, because that is the right thing to do.
Okay. All right. All right. So keeping
And
on.
and you may not agree with that. Folks listening may be going, "You are an absolute idiot, Flynn. That's not how the real world works." I get that, but this is also the idealized fantasy animal people world. Let's at least pretend that is an option.
Um. Okay. So here's the thing. I don't disagree with that on the whole. I don't really disagree with that on the whole. It's more about the idea of how that's how that is ultimately applied and kind of used to explore this ethical dilemma. Because my issue here is not really that um, I think Sonic should have killed him. Again, I don't want him to. It was more, I don't really think that this was an ethical dilemma that is a good idea to explore in a series like this. As a comic book purposes, you can't address the other side of this debate. Like Doctor Who, for example, like I'll take Doctor Who for example, because they explicitly try exploring something like this, where they have a character who was trying to be who came to this town to try to who came to a particular old western town after and was trying to help rebuild them and help give them technology and food and medicine, all this kind of stuff. But this was after he ended up um, being a doctor during war and was experimenting and manipulating a bunch of people in the process. And one of the people that he ended up experimenting and torturing on came there to try to kill them and was basically holding the entire town hostage. If anyone leaves, he was going to kill anyone who ended up walking out of the town unless they walk out of it. And the whole idea was about challenging the doctor himself to say, stick to his mercy, where try to do whatever he can to try to stick to his mercy and not just give this guy to the weeds, to give this guy to this guy, but find a way to mediate and stick to his higher to basically not give in to just being just as bad as the other villains possible. But the problem that came out of that episode is that in order for the plot to really happen, not only did to ultimately explore that plot, three people had to die in the process, and the guy ended up basically killing himself anyway. So while I get the idea of trying to stick to the idea of mercy, my idea about mercy is that mercy is only really applicable when you are not adding is only applicable when more negativity is not added to the world. This is not to say that I think and I'm not saying like that means that we need to start killing people, start doing all this kind of, or just give away, like try to explore, try to find another way to do that. But the issue that I have is I don't really think in a series like this where you want to keep your hero from having any blood, where generally you don't want to have the. I don't think a proper thing that you can explore, especially when you end up focusing so much on how this other person ended up causing so much problems in the process. Because during the Metal Virus arc, we focus a lot about how many people were getting turned into viruses, were suffering in the process, getting turned into zombies, suffering in the process, and was basically trying to imply that they were going to not only lose all their consciousness, but basically rot away in this if Sonic didn't do anything. Now, I'm not arguing that. So the issue was not that I think Sonic should have killed them. It was more I don't think that this is an ethical dilemma that really Sonic should be dealing with if you can't or really are not only can't but it's both not fitting for the character as well as you can't properly explore that other side. It's because like Sonic doesn't have a kill rule. Sega's never going to allow him to have a kill rule. So it was more. It was not that I think that the moral position that you have is wrong. It's more I don't think that's something that that's something that needs to be explored in a book like this where where you can't really address both sides of that. You can't really address both sides of that discussion. Yeah, but that's another thing. So we can move on from that. So speaking towards the end of that arc, one of the things that you were doing with the end of the arc is that Sonic ended up getting sent to the Soul Dimension, and he ended up having amnesia. But the problem is, in the very next scene he shows up in, that's in issue 32, he already ends up having all of his amnesia. He basically ends up getting all of his memories back from after Blaze is helping him do that. So I guess my question is, why did we need to have him have amnesia in the first place?
It was a thematic callback to the beginning of how the story began. The absolute crazy levels of chaos shenanigans that they were doing.
Okay, but how much of it is a consequence if it just ends up getting resolved in the next scene?
Not terribly huge, but enough to give you a little bit of, I don't want to say anxiety, but curiosity on where it was going to go.
Okay. All right. Let's move over to our boy Knuckles. So I get the idea. So one of the things that you were doing with him in this story is that you were trying to have him on that she was trying to put him back on Angel Island. But considering how much the rest of the franchise seems to more or less like not have him really stick to being the guardian of the guardian of Angel Island, mainly because they want to keep him involved in the plot. Uh, I'm kind of curious about why put him back on Angel Island instead of just continuing what Sega was going for with that.
We had to. He had to go home
Well,
at the end. We
okay.
also had to end the resistance in the book as using resistance anymore. So we had to wrap up the resistance and we had to put Knuckles back on Angel Island.
Okay. All right, let's move over to Starline real quick. So, okay, so one of the things about also when it comes to a book like this, along with adding in new characters, I am especially for adding in more villains. But Starline has been kind of a has I've been trying to I've read everything with the book. I've read both Bad Guys as well as I'm currently reading Imposter Syndrome. And Starline is kind of confusing to me for a couple of reasons, but the biggest one in particular is why introduce an antagonistic threat who seems to be more focused on Eggman than being even a thematic challenge or contrast to Sonic.
Well, because we have Eggman as the big bad. We've had Rough and Tumble, and we've had Mimic, and we've had the Deadly Six. We've had plenty of enemies directed at Sonic and crew. Starline is more of an investigation of the typical toady to Eggman, but taking it in a different direction. Instead of doing what we did with Snively and what's been done with Grimer and Sleet and Dingo and even the SSSS squad to a degree, all of them at some point were like, man, forget Eggman. I'm going to be my own guy. And Starline is a different approach on that, where it's someone who is truly in love with the idea of this villainous figure and doesn't want to let go of that. It's his fixation on the ideal of what they think that obsession that comes.
Okay. All right. Uh, Lastly, but not least, when it comes to not only this book, not only what you were trying to do on this book, but really what your future plans are in terms of writing for Sonic, because it really sounds like you're not done anytime soon. Like you're going to be working on this you're going to be working with Sonic as long as you can, for as long as possible. What ideas are you trying to explore? What ideas overall would you like to try to explore with the Sonic franchise? Or are you trying to explore the Sonic franchise?
Um, what can I say that I won't get in trouble for? um, like I said, Evan is in the driver's seat for IDW, so mostly I'd be following her lead. But after introducing Surge and Kit and Starline, I'm looking to at least tie a bow on one of those. And what I would like to see for Sonic in general is a little bit of a crack in the status quo. Like you mentioned Knuckles earlier, and the fact that he's supposed to be on Angel Island, but he's also supposed to be involved in the adventures, and how that just does not sync. Deal with that. Do something with Angel Island and get Knuckles off that damn rock so he can do things. We talked a lot about Amy Rose and her characterization and her role in the greater plot, and give Amy something that isn't Sonic. Let's solidify who she is and what she does and what her dynamic is with everybody, and give her something to do. And Tails, who had these big heroic moments back in the Adventure series, and then by forces is cowering in a little ball going, Sonic, help me. No. The boy has grown. Let him grow a little bit more and let him take flight. Let him ascend from just the sidekick. Let him become a little bit more. Maybe let's see the world progress, even if it's just the smallest step forward. We've been doing this for 30 years now. A little less if you want to just count the adventure stuff and onwards, modern Sonic. But let's see the world of Sonic become a little more cohesive, a little more narratively driven in a way that isn't just per game, and see the characters grow, even if it's a small bit. See them grow in at least a partially new direction. It's a small branch, something a little different, something that we haven't seen time and again, but just a little bit of divergence, a little something new. It's not something we can probably do in the book, but I don't know. We'll see what the future holds.
Okay. All right. Okay. So here's the thing. I really wasn't going to ask this, but you said it in the last question. I kind of have to follow up on that. So in Forces, yeah, I am with the consistent on that I was not wild about the whole cowering in fear from chaos in the beginning of Forces. I don't like that scene at all. But I'm kind of curious. You kind of did the same thing at the end of the end of the Metal Virus arc, where he's cowering in fear from the two Chows. I was just kind of like, was that your idea, or like, what were you going for with that?
Yeah, those are completely different scenarios. This was Tails on his own against Chaos freaking Zero, when Tails has, at least to some degree, fought Chaos 4. He should have stood up and done. At the end of Metal Virus, that's it. It's game over. He's infected. There is literally nowhere else to run. The world is ending around him. Beneath him, there is no hope. Around him, there is no hope. The only way he's going to survive this, if Sonic happens to get this last second Hail Mary. He is in the process of being killed. That, I feel like, is enough to make him go, Sonic, please win. It's a kind of a prayer for, I know you can do it. Please just do this. We are out of options. I have literally been painted into the corner, and the corner is now painting over me. Sonic, do something. Completely different scenarios.
Okay, then. All right. That is my last question.
All right. Well, I had a good time. Did you?
Yes, I did.
Excellent. Before we wrap it up, is there anything you want to plug? Anywhere you want to send people to go after the show?
Yeah, if anyone wants to follow my thoughts on Sonic and other fun things I find on the internet, you can go follow me at Dekokamii on Twitter.
Excellent. So that's going to wrap up this special guest edition of the BumbleKast. Thank you once again for sponsoring the show, my friend, and for all the in-depth questions. We are going to have another special guest episode on Monday. We're pushing back the priority Q&A because it's going to be Valentine's themed, because you know how much I love discussing shipping. And then we'll be back to our regularly scheduled Q&A. Kyle, thank you for all your contributions during the show.
That's fine. I had a good time. I was just listening. I like having this, personal podcast thing going on, where you can interject and say, hey, it cut out. Can you do that again?
And until then, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and we will see you next.
And of course, it cut out.
Are you freaking kidding?
We will see you next. And that was it.
And we'll see you next time on the BumbleKast.
There we go. Jesus. I don't know what's going on.
It wasn't as bad as yesterday.
It wasn't. No. I don't know what is going on.
David, was it stuttery on your end?
No, it was fine. It was fine for me.
Completely. Okay, so like when I was cutting off Ian, you were like, "Why is he cutting him off?" I didn't hear anything. Is that how it was going?
Yeah, no, it was never an issue for me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to figure something out what's going on my end. So, yeah.
Solidify that and that it and Tails, who has
Discord is I hate it. I'm going to kill it.
We're almost
Am I going to murderize it? You said it was Amy is where you cut out right there. You've been listening to the BumbleKast, a co-production of Bumble King Comics and the KNGI Network. Original theme music composed by Ken Coda Snyder. Remixed intro by T-Lopes. Find out more information, along with podcast feeder links, MP3 downloads, and more at bumbleking.com and kngi.org.
Part of it is many came out of nowhere. That caught me by surprise.
Discord, I'm going to kill you. He said part of it is, and then silence. And then he came back.